All right, welcome to the 12 Days of Innovation Summit. My name is Taylor Williams, and I have the honor of sitting here with George Couros, author, educator, speaker. We're so excited to have him be a part of the summit. So, George, I just want to start out. You've got your new book that just came out, Innovate Inside the Box. Can you introduce that and tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, Innovate Inside the Box is actually, it's a, I don't know, maybe considered like a sequel to the Innovator's Mindset. And it actually, I talk about it, kind of where the idea sparked from in the first place. When I wrote the Innovator's Mindset, I would say that it was a book for all educators, but could be more applicable to administrators, even though like tons of teachers have read it and seen and, you know, received value out of it. And one of the things that I've always talked about is our willingness to grow from feedback, to challenge ourselves. And basically, I had all 5-star reviews for a certain point, and my first negative review actually said, you know, this is a great book, but there should be more ideas for teachers. And, you know, what we typically do, we get upset by that, you know, in our head, justify why someone's wrong, you know, how they weren't looking for the right thing. And, you know, I actually sat back and thought about the feedback and said, you know, yeah, that actually, you know, there is something there, there's an opportunity there. And so this book is basically framed on the 8 characteristics of the innovator's mindset, which I talk about obviously in the first book. But what we do, myself and Katie Novak, who's, if you don't know Katie Novak, probably one of the leading educators on the notion of universal design for learning, and just absolutely an amazing educator person, incredible. You should definitely follow her on Twitter or Instagram if you don't already. So what we do is I talk about each characteristic of the innovator's mindset, you know, for example, like reflection, resilience, how we network, things like that, and talk about why they're so important, why they're so crucial to the work that we do, and how they really empower educators and students. And then Katie Novak actually gives really concrete ideas of how you can actually implement that using universal design for learning. But I think the other part of it that I think is really important in why I wrote the book is basically the notion of innovate inside the box is that we work within constraints in education. We always will. And there's always, no matter what we do. And we need to continuously, you know, push what those constraints are and, you know, challenge and open up doors, you know, obviously for our students, for ourselves. But until we get to, you know, and I guess I should even say until we get to a point, because there's never going to be a point where we get everything that we want. But while we are continuously pushing and changing those boundaries, we need to figure out how do we actually create really amazing opportunities for the students and the people that we serve today. And how do we work within those constraints? And Katie actually, in a conversation with her, she says something really profound, and it's always stuck with me. She said, the students in your grade 3 class this year, this is it. This is their 1 year at grade 3. And so how do you actually ensure that's the best opportunity for them possible? You know, and we could talk about all the things we don't have, but how do we look for opportunity to ensure that this is such a memorable experience, as opposed to those kids looking back saying, oh, that was, you know, our teachers was a wasted year because, you know, they didn't even try because of whatever. It's not like teachers don't try and don't make incredible things, but it's really shifting our thinking to look for opportunity as opposed to just, you know, problems.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think just diving into the book and being familiar with the innovator's mindset, it was very practical ideas that centered around your original information in from Innovator's Mindset, and it's been awesome to dive in. So I did have some questions specifically about the book and just your thought process through it. So I do want to take one of the questions that you actually wrote in the book and pose it back to you. So, you know, tell us, you wrote the question, tell us about one educator who had an impact on you as a student and what they did to make that made that impact. And so I want to ask that to you.
Well, I could probably think of a few off the top of my head. Cindy Penrose was my grade 3 homeroom teacher, but she was also my kindergarten to grade 8 music teacher. And And I'll tell you that a lot of the things that she did, it was kind of interesting because I would actually consider her very old school. And, you know, old school when I went to school in the 80s is very different. And so, but she really inspired me to have a love of drama, love of music. And I'll tell you that it's actually lent a lot to, you know, what I do with speaking and, you know, how I present to this day, how, you know, my presence on the stage. And I actually remember in my grade 8 report cards, this was my last year in elementary school, she wrote, at some point, you will be doing something on a stage in your lifetime. Which is funny because, you know, like you think of acting or whatever, and, you know, now I'm a speaker, and I credit a lot to that too. David Hill is actually, he was a newer teacher. He probably came to my school in grade 4. I can actually name every single teacher I've ever had, which is, you know, it's surprising to me when people can't. He came to our school in grade 4. He was our phys ed teacher, but he was also my grade 8 homeroom teacher. And it's funny because I actually cannot tell you anything he taught me. Like I can tell you, like, he taught me basketball and things like that, but I can't tell you any like class. And he just made me excited about coming to school. He was just an awesome person, really focused on relationships. And I actually remember when he actually he had a love of the Seattle Supersonics NBA team that doesn't exist anymore, and I had a love of the Lakers, and they were actually playing in the playoffs. And we made a bet that whoever's team won, the other person would have to wear like something from that we gave them representing the other team for a day. And I remember it was probably like 90, 95, 100 degrees, and the Lakers won. And I actually made him wear a Lakers sweater, which is like the warmest sweater you could wear. It's like a Canadian winter sweater. And I made him wear it during, I can still remember that, right? And one of the things that I talk about in the book quite a bit and is about the core of innovative teaching and learning and how we start with relationships at the center. And he was just the embodiment of that I know actually did well in his class. I know that I did well because I liked him. And it wasn't just that he knew who I was, but I knew who he was. And I think that's something that's often missed in our conversations about relationships, is that they're reciprocal. So when I know the students in front of me, that's obviously important. But when they actually feel a connection to me in some way, there is a power to that. And him and I to this day still talk and, you know, have an impact. And yeah, I definitely had a lot of teachers that did really incredible things that stick out to me to this day about, you know, what stuck out to me for like learning and power. But every one of them that had a relationship in the classroom, I tend to go above and beyond. And what I also know is the classes where I struggled and the teacher was really focused on the content more than me as a person, I was a terror. I was horrible because, and I think a lot of people know this too, and I guarantee you'll visualize certain kids, and I was one of them, is that there are a lot of kids who would rather be funny in a class clown than be deemed stupid. So it's kind of a mass, right? So I would just, you know, be terrible in class because I didn't understand the content. And I know that sometimes even in classes I struggled, when I had a relationship with the person, I was more likely to actually be engaged and try harder and try to understand the content. Not that I was, you know, amazing at it, but I guarantee the teacher that we see relationships as an investment of time, that people are able to get a lot more out of me when I felt they cared about me as a human being. So yeah, I could list a lot of teachers that had an impact on me like that.
Those are great stories and great examples of that. Is exactly what you wrote about, just relationship. And it kind of leads me to another question, and this stems from the foreword of your book, actually. But you say in that foreword that the curriculum tells you what, but not how. The how is what separates great teachers from others.
Yeah.
And it's part of the artistry of teaching. So, I mean, you've already shared some examples about the relationship piece of the how.
Yeah.
So what are some other examples of teachers that have found their how, and what did they do to get there?
Well, one of the ideas I talked about in the innovator's mindset was I was teaching a health curriculum, and I'll tell you, it was not my forte. It was like one of those classes that the admin just dumps on you, like, hey, like no one else is going to teach us, so you have to, even though you don't know what you're doing. I'm sure every teacher's had that at some point in their career, where it wasn't really their content area, but it wasn't anyone else's either, so you got to teach it. And I remember that year, I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to teach it. I was dreading it. And I was became innovative out of sheer laziness. And I actually had my students break down. I said, hey, I got to teach this health curriculum this year, and here are the objectives of what we're going to do. So here's what I would like you to do. I would like you, each group, you form groups of whatever, I don't really care. And I want you to pick, there's certain elements, and I actually separated the objectives by certain different things. And what I'm going to get you to do, I want you to learn it on your own. Then I want you to teach it to the class. And I'll tell you, the students would taught it so much better than I ever would. They took a huge interest. There was like a huge sense of pride in how they presented it, because they actually didn't just present it. They actually had to assess the other students and check for their understanding and things like that. And I was just blown away. And it was way better than if I would have taught it, begrudgingly, to be honest with you. And really shifting where the students were not just learners, but they became teachers of the content. And one of my favorite quotes is from Joseph Joubert. He says, to teach is to learn twice. And so when I have to actually teach this, I actually have a better understanding of it. And it really shifted a lot of the way that I looked at. And so I still covered all the objectives. I still covered the entire curriculum. But I did it in a way where it really empowered students. They had a lot of voice. They did things I never even would have thought of in a million years. And I think that one of the things I talk about in Innovate Inside the Box is when you know your kids, when you build those relationships and you know what some of their passions are, that you can start tapping into that. So for example, I pose this question to audiences, groups I work with all the time, how many people have read The Great Gatsby in high school? And the majority of teachers did read it, right? Now the follow-up question is, do you believe The Great Gatsby was actually in the curriculum, that it was students must read The Great Gatsby? Or did it cover some of the curriculum objectives? We already owned 100 copies, and basically the teacher knew the book inside out. Had nothing to do with the interests of the students, but basically now I'm not saying The Great Gatsby is you shouldn't read it or anything like that, because I know if an English teacher hears that, they might be upset with me. But I actually did not like fiction. To be honest with you, I didn't like fiction because fiction was constantly crammed down our throats as kids. And based on the teacher's interest and what the teacher thought we should read as opposed to what I'm interested in. So if you know stuff about me, I'm interested in basketball. Are there any books that are basketball related that would have also covered the curriculum that I had the opportunity to read, that I could have done on my own? And one of the things that you're actually seeing a lot of educators kind of push back on, and I think it's really fascinating, is the notion of leveled readers. And I'm not saying don't use level readers or anything like this, but what they're seeing is that students will read at a much higher level if they're actually interested in the content. But if they have no interest in the content, then their growth starts to stagnate. And I find that fascinating. So the connection of the how, it is kind of centered in that relationship piece, right? Do I know the students in front of me? Do I know who they are? And can I start tailoring some of the things that I'm doing in the classroom that are tied to the curriculum that actually bring out the best of my kids, where I'm building on what their strengths are, what their passions are. Now, this is really important for me to say, because I'm a realist, right? I don't believe 100% of the time every curriculum objective should be totally matched towards, every single student to base what they're interested in. But when we create those opportunities, then the students, the compliance stuff, the stuff that we have to do, becomes much more tolerable. But a lot of times we just focus on all the things that we have to do. We don't actually focus on what the kids want to do. And I think you have to find that balance. And I think it's okay. I think it's okay to teach kids things they're not interested in, to expose them to different ideas. One of my biggest regrets is not sticking with piano, not learning to speak Greek, because my parents backed off of me and they're like, I didn't want it. And I wish they would have said, no, this is going to be important to you. You're going to find it valuable. And so there's a lot of things that we wish we would have stuck with, and it's okay to have that. But the more opportunities you have where you could tap into students' passions and strengths, the easier it is to do things they dislike. And I'll give you an example just from professionally, because if you think about professionally, we're the same way. I had my one principal, and I reference her, Kelly Wilkins, best leader I've ever had, reference her in the book. she really tapped into me and she really brought out strengths. Like she did things that I never saw a principal do. And then she could get me to do things I absolutely despise with a smile on my face. And I would like be in the middle of doing it. I'm like, how did she get me to do this? Like, how did she get me to do this thing I hated? Because I actually would just do anything for her because she was so awesome. And she just really showed value in me. She really gave me a lot of ownership over the school and the direction in the areas that I excelled in, even though I wasn't an administrator, I didn't control the budget. And yeah, then we are more willing to do that. And so I think, it's not about making kids only do things they love and they don't ever have to like struggle. It's actually really finding those opportunities where they love it, where the struggle part is much more tolerable. It's like candy with medicine, kind of analogy there. So
yeah.
I think that's kind of, like I said, for me, like I said, that's why that relationship is at the core. Knowing your kids helps you kind of modify some of these things, because a lot of times teachers will do things that they think are really cool to them, but the kids don't care. So really, but if it's something interesting to the kid, then yeah, it's an easy win.
Yeah. Yeah. So along those same lines, then you do speak in the book, in both books, about developing resiliency in the students.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning that as well. It can't just be all about their passions, but we do have to give them the opportunity. So when you're in your experience as, a principal and as a school leader, how would you create that culture of resilience in your school and then inspired in your teachers for them to do it in their classrooms?
Yeah, there's a little activity that I do when I'm doing workshops. Like a lot of people, when they hear me, they think I'm not, it's all about kids creating and just do whatever the kids want and stuff like that. And like content's not important anymore. It should be, and I don't believe that. I believe, content's really crucial. I'm not someone who says lectures are bad. I lecture quite a bit in my role, and I think that I provide some really valuable content. But if you only lecture, then we have a problem, right? And John Medina, the writer of Brain Rules, he made this really, really valuable analogy, and it has always stuck with me. He said, creation without content is the equivalent of playing the air guitar. You might know the motions, but you're not really doing anything, right? And so one of the things that I do often to develop this resiliency is actually I'll give some content, and then I'll pull someone up, and then I'll say, hey, we're going to do this little video. We're going to share this, on Twitter. I have a lot of followers on Twitter, so a lot of people are going to see this. So let's make it good. And then we'll share the video in front of, could be up to like 2,000 or 3,000 people. I've done it in front of 50 people. I've done it in thousands, whatever. And then when we do that video, what I'll do is say, okay, we're going to take a 30-minute break, which people are blown away by because no one gets 30-minute breaks. And but over the break, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do a video reflection. I want you to do on Twitter. You don't have to have a Twitter account. Find somebody in the room who does. Get in their video. You can do it by yourself. You do it in a group, whatever. And this is the resiliency part. I'll say, if you don't know what you're doing, not my problem. Figure it out. And people are like, what? Like, you're not going to teach us the step-by-step. And I think a lot of times when we do this step-by-step process, we actually take the resiliency away from our kids and from ourselves. It's like, oh, no, someone will show me how to do this. I don't have to learn anything on my own. And what's really fascinating is you will see how people figure stuff out differently. Like some people they'll walk out of the room and they'll find a quiet place and they don't want to talk to anybody. They need to know how to do it themselves. So they'll just sit and press buttons. They'll figure it out, do whatever. And some people will turn to other people that they know. They'll start asking questions. They'll start figuring it out. And then you can see the videos will be popping up during the screen, during the break. And people are, a lot of people who don't want to do it will now do it because they see their friend who did it and they don't want to be, the person who couldn't figure it out when their friend could. And then we talk about, why is this valuable? How to use this in the classroom? But then we talk about the mentality that we actually have to create where we have to get to a space where we say to our kids, figure it out. I'm not going to show you. And you have access to information, whether it's, you can walk across, the room, talk to another person. You can go online, you can figure it out. And I think that those three words, figure it out, is something we need to be more comfortable with saying, not only to our students, but to our educators, to our administrators, because it does develop a resiliency where you actually embrace the struggle. And like I said, a lot of times we overteach, where now the student becomes dependent upon the teacher for information. But if that's what you actually do, then what does that lead to? And like I can't remember if I talked about this in one of the books. I know I've written about it somewhere. I've written, probably 1,800 blog posts in the last, 10 years. So I know I've written it somewhere. When I first started teaching grade 4, it was my first full year class. I'll tell you, I was funny, super engaging. Kids loved listening to me. I could tell stories all day. And then, it was just, they learned a lot, I'll tell you. And it was fun. And, like, I'm 6'4", so to a grade 4 kid, just being tall was like amazing. Like, I achieved something, by growing up. And then I remember some of those kids coming to the next year and say, you know what? Oh, like, we miss you so much. Like, our new teacher's like super boring. They don't really tell stories. They just like make us do things and, figure stuff out. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what did I do to these kids? And basically the kids were just basically dependent upon a person to give them information, to like do it in a super compelling way, to do this, whatever. And then the teacher after me, who was actually an amazing teacher, was actually working the kids so they could figure stuff out on their own. And then I started seeing like how basically, I could make anything really interesting, and especially now, like, you have so much access to so much information. But if the kid is now dependent upon the teacher for making information interesting or teaching everything, you're not developing resiliency, you're developing dependence. And so I think we have to be comfortable removing ourselves in this situation. I'm like, of course you don't do that all the time, right? There's things that we can teach and whatever, but you have to find those opportunities where kids struggle, where they develop this, where they actually learn, I can actually figure this out on my own. And I think that's a really crucial skill that, but I think one of the things that's really important, when I did that with the teachers, I provide them time. And I think a lot of times we say to our teachers, oh, like, you need to figure out, you need to do that, but we're not going to give you any time for that. Just do it on your own after school. And we bombard them. But I see this as valuable. So like, you have teachers collaborating, creating information, creating content. I might not be leading it. And so I think that's, I think we have to be comfortable, if we think it's valuable, to develop that in our staff and give them time during work. And I think that we just hope everyone works 17-hour days and has no family. And it's not really a good thing to develop, to have with our teachers.
Well, and that just opens up opportunities for teachers to start to innovate how they do things, to free up that time, to use tools to take grading off their desk and that sort of thing. So, that's excellent. So, shifting gears a little bit, you do spend some time in the book talking about going from a culture of compliance to engagement to empowerment. Just talk to us about that and how that just, I don't want to call it an evolution, but how that shift really fits into the classroom today and how you can get to that point.
Yeah, and I think the notion of compliance, this is something I've actually involved for sure on in my mentality. It was like, it's either compliance, it's either engagement, or it's either empowerment. And I actually don't believe that anymore. I believe that, there's some times where compliance is the necessary thing. And the analogy that I always give is, like, I pay US federal taxes, even as a Canadian, and I can't just say to the IRS, hey, I've done a really cool PowerPoint this year. I haven't filled out any reforms. I think you'd find this really interesting, right? I have to do it exactly the way they say I have to do it. But the reality of it is, I don't mind doing it. It's not my favorite thing, for sure, but it also allows me to work in the United States, which I believe is a tremendous blessing because, I have a visa and all this other stuff. And so I get to do a job I love, and I'm really empowered to have ownership, over what I do. So that stuff doesn't bothered me as much as it would if I hated what I did every single day. And so I think that in some places, and not because of teachers' ill intent, I don't think that's the issue at all, is that we have districts that focus so much on standardized testing that we test kids all year to test them in the end, right? There's a really good saying that you don't fatten a pig by constantly weighing it, right? And I think that's what we're doing with a lot of kids, right? And to be honest with you, it's not state testing, it's usually district testing to practice for the state test. Like, we're over testing because that's what we choose to do it. And so there is a culture of compliance. It's like, all we need you to do is be able to do well on this test, and there's no empowerment. Now, you do have to do that test. That is going to be a point. And so there is some compliance there, obviously. But I think really it is kind of finding the opportunities for empowerment, kind of going back to the earlier conversation that we're having, is really knowing the students, bringing out and giving them empowering opportunities so we can tap into what they love. And one of the things that I share, and I share this in my talk, I share this in the book, there's this really awesome video of this probably 16, 17-year-old young boy, or young man, he's talking about the notion of 0 calories. And so he talks about this notion of 0 calories, and he does like a YouTube video, right? And so the kid explains it, 5 minutes, talks about why 0 calories doesn't do what we hope it should do. And he goes through that entire process. He goes through this entire thing. And so what I get teachers say, like, have you ever had a student in your class say, I want to be a YouTuber? And everyone's experienced that now. We have a lot of kids who that's their dream. And let's be honest, a lot of adults like laugh in their faces because they don't think it's a real thing, which is, people are making very nice livings, doing something they love. And, people are making livings that maybe not that much money, but enough that they can live and do whatever, and they can work from home, whatever. So in my class, I have to teach this science curriculum. And I know this kid wants to be a YouTuber. So how I connect the two is that a lot of people say, well, you talk about innovation, but we got to teach curriculum. And what I say is, well, how you teach the curriculum actually is the innovation. So I know this kid wants to be a YouTuber. I know I have to do this test, the compliance part. But if I got the kid to explain the content and actually do it in a way that's meaningful to them, then how do I actually bring it out where the kid actually explains the content, knows it inside out, still has to do the compliance part because we have the test that's coming up on this. Because I'll tell you, the kid will know the content inside out by the test, but also empower them. And kind of, again, referencing an earlier conversation, if a kid says to me, well, I don't know how to make a YouTube video that wants to be a YouTuber, my response would be, well, it's going to be hard to become a YouTuber. You should figure that out. Like, you should figure out how to make that video. Because the misconception a lot of times in education is like, well, how do you mark the YouTube video? Well, you're not grading the YouTube video. You're actually grading the kid's understanding of the science concept. The video is a delivery. Just like you shouldn't be marking neatness on a science test to understand, because yeah, you can talk about the neatness, you can talk about that process, but that actually does not actually have any indication of the kid's understanding of science. And so I think that when you look at the delivery, we still got to do the compliance, we still got to do the test, but how do we actually empower kids through that process where they have more ownership, that the compliance part is not so intolerable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That's a great example too, about bringing it all those pieces in together. So I have one more question before we kind of tie it up here. And you talk about risk in your book as well. And you define it as moving from a comfortable average in pursuit of an unknown better. So how did you come to that definition? And what ways did you challenge yourself as an educator to become more of a risk taker in the classroom?
Yeah. So the movie. So first of all, when the notion of risk, when you hear that term, it kind of insinuates danger, right? Like you're doing something that could cause like irreversible harm and things like that, right? And the analogy that I give, because like when you talk about risk as moving from a comfortable average in pursuit of an unknown better, it's that people will stick with things they actually don't know that don't work because they're fine with it, right? They're comfortable with it. And the question I always ask groups, and the majority of people know exactly what I'm talking about. I'll say, who in this room has stayed in a relationship way too long. And a lot of people are like, oh, like they think of certain people, they think of certain relationships. And I always say, I hope it's not right now. Like, I hope you're, not thinking of the person you're with now. And then you ask the question, why did you stay? If you knew it wasn't good, why did you stay? And a lot of people will stay because that's what they know. That's, and they're scared of leaving something they know for something unknown. And then and a lot of times when they actually end up leaving or move on, it's not that they dislike the person. They're thinking like, why didn't I do that sooner? This is like so much better, but you're kind of in the middle of that process. And so when you take that analogy and you think about it in the context of teaching, the Great Gatsby example, I could tell you when I was in grade 3 that in grade 11, Herman Bauer's English class, we are going to read The Great Gatsby. And the reason why I knew that is because I had 2 older brothers who would do an imitation of Herman Bauer, who's the best person, and they go, Daisy, Daisy, Daisy. So they do this imitation of him reading Great Gatsby. So he doesn't know any of us. He doesn't know, 8 years, things tend to change in any time frame within 8 years. We already know because that's what he's taught and that's what he's comfortable with. And so I think that, is there an opportunity where you change those things because, hey, these kids, I don't know if these kids are going to be really as interested in this, and will it actually bring out the best, in the curriculum and doing those ideas. So I think that when we look at that, it's, are we doing this because this is what we're comfortable with, or are we doing this because this is what works for kids? And so if you're doing something, and I think this is really important, if you're doing something that you've done for years and years and years that works for kids and it really brings out the best of them, awesome, keep doing it, right? I'm not against, and one of the things I've really, really pushed myself on is not saying the word traditional as a synonym of bad. Because a lot of times when we talk about traditional practice, we're like, oh yeah, these teachers that do this traditional practice, and we say it like it's the most negative thing. And one of the things that, and I'm doing this a little bit here, but I do all the time, I tell stories all the time to make my point. And storytelling is literally the oldest teaching practice there is. And it's not bad. It's something we do. We have different opportunities to tell stories in a different way. And some people tell stories in a very traditional way, and it's awesome. And so I think that if it's still working for the kids, then great, keep doing it, right? But sometimes it's more like what's easiest for the adult. And for me, one of the things to get myself into this mindset is I try to push my own learning and do things that I am uncomfortable with and sharing things. So I've been blogging for 10 years, almost 10 years. And the whole purpose of the blog was not because I want to get my voice out there. That was not it at all. I wanted to how are we going to do this for our students? Like we've talked about portfolios. Is this an avenue? I'm going to go through it from the viewpoint of a learner and try to understand it so I can help my kids. And what happens too often in education is we jump straight to the teaching without doing the learning. And really, and I talk about one of the concepts, one of the core elements is the notion of master educator, master learner, that we need to continuously push our own learning so that we can have an understanding of what opportunities exist for our kids. And so that changes a lot of the things that we do. But I'm still, I try to dabble with new things, and sometimes they work great and sometimes they don't. But one of the things I just put out to people, I'm going to try starting a podcast, and I really don't know what I'm doing. And I know a lot of people do it. And the purpose is what does that medium look like? How does it help my learning? And is this something we do with students? And actually I was inspired because one of the groups, I did a podcast recently with a group of students at a school, and that's how they shared their learning. I'm like, hey, these kids are doing this. Why don't I try this and figure it out? And does it benefit me? And I think we have to find those opportunities where we put ourselves in uncomfortable situations as a learner, so that we can understand first that our kids struggle, and when we'll have a better understanding when we struggle ourselves. But we just have to evolve in our practice, and that means not really only thinking about teaching in new ways, but how we learn, right? So we're like, really, any teacher should be an expert in learning. And I think that learning takes risks, and so you have to immerse yourself in that. So that's really how I try to embody it myself.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And as you think about that and taking those risks, one of the things that I've interacted with teachers from our district and others is the idea of letting go of control, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned it in your book too. And I kind of want to close on this one here, is that the idea of feedback and getting feedback from your students about your teaching. That's a risky and dangerous place for a lot of teachers because they don't understand what could come of it. It's just kind of given that free forum there. So last one, just talk about feedback and gathering that from students in an honest way where students feel comfortable giving that feedback to the teacher.
Yeah, I think it's a way for us to grow. And I know that sometimes when we ask feedback, and I'm guilty of this. I did this early in my career. I would ask feedback from my students on my teaching at the end of the year when it would have no benefit to those students in front of me, only the students after. And I think that it's okay to ask feedback in the middle of the year, and redirect some of the things that you're doing and understand, like, is there certain things that I'm doing that are not helpful, or like, what's beneficial. And I think that it's funny because, of course, we're terrified of someone saying we're not really good or that we struggle with something. Yet our students, that's every day for them, right? That they go through it where there's a constant idea of feedback is crucial to their development and to their growth. And so I think that just opening yourself up to having some of those conversations with your students, doing it on a regular basis. And one of the things, I used to rep basketball, and so a lot of people don't know this about referees. So usually when you referee, there's someone who's sitting in the stands who's evaluating you during the game. And so halftime comes along and you have like 10 minutes. So it's a really short amount of time. And the reason I tell you why it's a short amount of time is the evaluator is not going to do like a positive sandwich because they don't have time. They're just going to tell you did this wrong, this was terrible, this is wrong, because they don't have the time to like build the rapport, right? And so you're just going to hear a lot of negative things. Now they'll say like, hey, so like instead of doing that, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And so the referees that are considered the best, who are actually move up quickly, because there's opportunities like, you start with elementary, you go to high school, go to college, go to pro, whatever, right? Like there's actually advancement, and the ones that are considered the best are the ones that can ref in the first half, get that feedback, and then they can see you implementing ideas in the second half. As opposed to, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to, like maybe down the road, I'm going to do this like years from now. Because it's gotta be quick growth because they want to see that improvement. Now, there were times, I'll tell you, as a referee, I'd say, like we come back at the end of the game, we talk, say, what, I tried this and I'm like really struggling with this. This doesn't seem to suit me. And people would still be appreciative that you actually tried and figured it out. But like some of the feedback, like a lot of people, when there's like, oh, you're not open to learning, it's like, no, you haven't bent your will to do exactly what I tell you, right? And that's not true. Sometimes we try some of the feedback and it doesn't work for us because we're all individuals, but I've tried and I know this doesn't work. So I'm going to actually maybe try this instead, or maybe I'm going to do this. So I can understand why this part is wrong. And I appreciate your feedback over here. And so instead of doing this, I'm going to try this instead to correct it. Maybe that's more suitable to me. And I think that, as teachers, we can't wait for, opportunities like for administrators to come in to only get feedback and things like this. Like we can grow every single day in our practice as long as we're open to feedback and we're open to implementing it. And I think one of the things that's important is, we can actually teach kids how to give feedback in a manner that, because if feedback comes from a totally place of hatred, then I could really care less what you have to say. And, and I'm not like, I'm maybe saying this more for the adults than I am for the kids. Right. But I think that developing kids, like, hey, here's some ways that you can actually give feedback where you can challenge somebody, but you still show value and you still honor them. And yeah, like maybe it softens the blow for the teacher, but that's a really good skill to teach a kid as they go in the world, because, you know, a lot of feedback that we give to people or that people receive is not from a place of, I want you to grow. It's feedback, I don't like you. And I think that, or, you know, this is wrong, and it doesn't actually show value of the person. So I think even teaching kids how to provide that feedback for a teacher in a way that honors that person would be a really great skill as well.
Absolutely. I think it's not just about what you as a teacher then can consume, but those skills that you're building in the students, those, you know, soft skills that go beyond there. So, George, thank you so much for being a part of this today. What's the best way for those who might not know to check out your blog and check out your obviously your books we'll have them linked on our website, but tell us about your blog. Where is that located?
GeorgeCouros.ca. So just my name.ca, because I am Canadian. And you can actually connect with me on Twitter, Instagram at GCouros. The book, Innovate Outside the Box, new book comes out. One of the things that I'm really proud of for this book, and the same thing with Innovator's Mindset, is they're meant to be conversational. They're not meant to, I don't know everything, right? I'm sharing some ideas, some things that I think, but I don't know your school community. I don't know your classrooms. I don't know. And I think that's why we talk about the importance of relationships. Even when I talk about that core of innovative teaching and learning, I'll say, here are some ideas, but you got to make this your own. You got to figure out what this looks like in your community. And so one of the things I'm really proud of the book, and really proud of, honestly, the work that I do, is that I want conversations with people about this, right? You know, conversations where we're looking for solutions to make things better. So if any of you listening have an opportunity to read the book and check it out, please feel free to tweet me, email me, hit me up on Instagram, share some of your thoughts. I'd love to learn from you too, because I think, you know, when we share with one another as educators, we elevate the profession. So I would love to hear from you too, because I'll tell you, I don't know all the answers, but I'm constant. I want to continuously learn. And I think that's what we want to embody as educators.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, George. We appreciate it.
No problem.